according to the Pew Research Center, 82% of all Americans own a cell phone. With usage numbers ever increasing, as of May 2010, this study acknowledged that 15% of all teens and young adults send over 200 text messages daily. So with all this information, we could safely assume that at least 8 out of 10 of you own a cell phone, and that it's likely not suffering from underuse. As a part of this generation, we could all acknowledge the many benefits of electronic communication. Emails, IMs, texts, Facebook, these are just a few of the many outlets that we use every day to keep in contact with friends, family, or coworkers. It's obviously made life and communication much more easier and convenient. But whoever said good communication was easy? My claim tonight is that despite its many benefits, electronic communication is negatively affecting the communication skills of today's society. I will prove this by first exploring the many aspects of interpersonal communication that electronic communication fails to meet. Second, by noting decreased perception of receivers in electronic communication. And lastly, by projecting the effects it will have to send unpracticed communicators into a professional world. First, I want to discuss the electronic communication's failure to satisfy interpersonal communication standards. In electronic communication, we're typically just trying to interpersonally communicate with another person. So let's define interpersonal communication. Robert Phelan, the author of Interpersonal Communication textbook, You Are Not the Center of the Universe, defines communication as a process whereby a sender and receiver attempt to share the same meaning of language, action, or thought. Simple enough. But if communication is going to be interpersonal, it has to meet 4 basic criterion. 1, both parties must be able to 1, see each other, 2, talk back and forth, 3, interrupt each other, and 4, respond immediately. So we notice right away that electronic communication fails to meet 3 of the 4 basic principles of interpersonal communication. So if we're not interpersonally communicating while we're on the telephone, why are we on a cell phone so much? I believe that in our attempt to simplify the lines of communication, we've watered down the art of interaction. And in turn, we leave both the sender and receiver of a conversation wanting. With electronic communication that involves only text, you can't hear the inflection in a sender's voice to emphasize meaning. A receiver can't look at facial cues to understand further meaning behind words. And feedback, though possibly quick, isn't immediate, therefore giving time to produce a fake reaction. So in its failure to meet interpersonal communication standards, electronic communication leaves gaps for misunderstandings. Dr. Kristen Byron of Syracuse University stated in an academic review in 2009 that using lean media such as email for ambiguous messages is less effective and efficient. It increases the likelihood of inaccurate communication, and more time is then spent resolving the miscommunication. So we see that both the sender and the receiver are left unfulfilled with electronic communication. But I would say the receiver even suffers more so. And this brings me to my second point, that electronic communication lowers a receiver's perception of the outside world. By this I mean that when you take time to read a message or reply to a message or check your email, you're lowering your chances of receiving something else from the outside world that's going on around you. Now, sometimes that's our goal. The Pew Research study I mentioned earlier also found that 60% of cell phone users use their cell phone to avoid boredom. But have we taken the time to realize that as we use our phone to distract us from boredom, we also use our phone to distract us from learning and receiving new information? Now you might think, hey, but I'm awesome. I can multitask like no other. I'm on Facebook, I can text, I can do homework and eat, all while watching TV. And now you are right to one degree. You are awesome. But in another sense, you failed in that you've assumed that you can multitask. Molecular biologist and University of Washington professor John Medina, in his book Brain Rules, says that multitasking, when it comes to paying attention, is a myth. Medina states that this is because the brain is a sequential processor, unable to pay attention to 2 things at the same time. He uses the example later of talking on a phone while driving, but I think it's just as applicable to talk about texting while driving. The state of California has realized our inability to multitask and therefore outlawed electronic communication while we drive. So if we can't efficiently text and drive, then we can't efficiently text and listen in a classroom, in a conversation, or anywhere else where our attention should be put forth. So to focus on electronic communication is to take away from the moment that we would otherwise be experiencing fully, the moments in which we would otherwise be communicating as a sender or receiver. So in our attempts to multitask as busy college students, we haven't practiced much. interpersonal communication, which brings me to my third claim, that electronic communication influences us to be unpracticed communicators that are sent out into a professional world that requires us to be competent communicators. Although there are some jobs that require minimal communication, most jobs require you to communicate interpersonally and express yourself efficiently to be successful. We might think the computer world would excuse us from communication skills, but even Phil LaPiccolo, the editor-in-chief of Computer Graphics World, said, given the complexity of next-generation projects and the multidisciplinary work groups arising to tackle them, employees must possess a third dimension of abilities, namely communication skills to effectively share specialized information with colleagues. Now, we're all familiar with the term that practice makes perfect, but I suggest to you that we haven't been practicing very well. And therefore, we will not only have communication skills far from perfect, but inadequate. In conclusion, I've discussed how electronic communication fails to meet interpersonal communication standards, how electronic communication decreases the perception of the outside world, and how this leaves communicators inadequate for the professional world. With all this information, I hope I've helped you to realize the negative effects of electronic communication on communication skills in today's society.
All right, I like the statistics that you have at the beginning to get our attention, and it's clear that electronic communication is ubiquitous, so that there's a widespread need to address this issue. You clearly state what your claim is. You have an excellent setup of what the structure is going to be, although the phrasing is not always declarative sentences. Sometimes it seems like it's expository in nature. Your internal signposting, though, is very clear and easy to follow. You do a good job explaining what the assumptions are. I thought that the combination of the resources and the way you speak to the audience and the way you seem to know the subject adds to your credibility immensely. The supporting material is, on the first point, it's about the criteria, and I thought that your conclusion there, sorry to say it that way, it's a little conclusionary. It's based on the criteria that you've got, but I think you need to explain why some of the electronic media they don't the closest you get to explaining how they don't replicate the interpersonal nature is the loss of inflection and tone and those kinds of things. But of course, that's something that would exist on the phone. It doesn't exist on the texting issue. So the question then becomes, do people compensate interpersonally in order to be able to use those electronic media? And I think that that's one of those places, like you get the emoticons and all those sorts of things that are supposed to help address those issues. I think you've got the start of a good argument here, but it needs a little bit more follow-through. I thought you were a little bit better on the second and third points, although it did seem on the second point that it was a little bit conclusionary. On the third point, you developed it a lot more effectively. I like the quotes that you have. I thought you had good authorities that you're citing for the most part. And again, I thought it was very well organized. I thought you had excellent audience contact. I appreciated the humor and the way you tried to relate to the audience. I don't have eyes in the back of my head, so I couldn't see how the audience was responding to it, but to hell with them, I'm responding to it, so don't worry about them too much. And I like the exit line that you have, too. Okay, thank you.